Beneath your skin lies a hidden universe of silent conversations that guide your every waking and sleeping moment. It is an intricate web of biology that never truly rests. Your body is composed of approximately 37 trillion distinct cells, all operating in perfect synchronization to maintain the singular experience of being you. To keep this immense cellular society connected, your nervous system generates enough electricity in a single day to power a low-voltage light bulb for 24 hours. As we settle in to uncover these secrets, feel free to gently support our journey by clicking the subscribe button if you enjoy learning while you drift off. If you were to lay out the complete network of blood vessels within a single adult, the length would astonishingly wrap around the Earth's equator 4 times. Through these vessels and nerves, messages travel at speeds reaching 270 miles per hour, allowing your toes to communicate with your brain in a fraction of a second. Yet, beyond these structural marvels, there are silent operators working in the shadows to maintain your equilibrium. A wandering path known as the vagus nerve acts as a biological superhighway, physically connecting the brainstem to the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. It is the longest cranial nerve in the body, and it dictates how calm and safe you feel without you ever making a conscious choice. We often think of intelligence as residing solely in the head, but a so-called second brain resides within the digestive system, possessing over 500 million neurons of its own. This enteric nervous system constantly whispers chemical signals upwards, influencing your mood and intuition in ways science is only just beginning to map. Remarkably, this gut brain creates 95% of the body's serotonin, the molecule responsible for happiness and sleep regulation. Working alongside this neural network are invisible chemical messengers that drift through your bloodstream, keeping strict time with the rotation of the planet. These circadian rhythms are ancient internal clocks that know when the sun rises and sets, coordinating the release of hormones to induce sleepiness even if you are in a completely dark room. This internal cosmos operates efficiently in the dark, managing the delicate balance between alertness and deep recovery. Every second, 2 million red blood cells die and are replaced by 2 million new ones, a constant cycle of rebirth occurring quietly in the marrow of your bones. Your heart will beat roughly 100,000 times before tomorrow morning, adjusting its rhythm based on subtle signals from that wandering nerve. Later, we will discover how this heart rhythm can actually synchronize with the people you love simply by being near them. The complexity is staggering, yet to you, it feels like nothing more than a gentle inhale and exhale. The surface area of your lungs, if spread flat, would cover the size of a tennis court to maximize oxygen intake. This oxygen fuels the metabolic fires that keep your body temperature stable, a precise thermostat set by a tiny region in the brain called the hypothalamus, ensuring you remain warm through the night. Deep beneath that hypothalamus lies the medulla oblongata, the lowest section of the brainstem and the structural anchor where your most vital involuntary systems originate. It is here, emerging specifically from a groove known as the post-olivary sulcus, that we find the physical root of the vagus nerve. While we often speak of it in the singular, this system is actually a pair of thick nerves, one arising from the left side of the brainstem and one from the right, creating a dual-lane superhighway that bypasses the spinal cord entirely to interact directly with the body's organs. Unlike its 11 sibling cranial nerves, which mostly stay contained within the safe confines of the head and neck to control eyes, ears, or facial muscles, the vagus nerve wanders far from home, embarking on a long, meandering descent deep into the chaos of the torso. This wandering path is not random, but the two sides do not remain symmetrical as they travel downward. In a fascinating twist of human development, the left and right vagus nerves differ significantly in their final positions. As a fetus develops in the womb, the stomach rotates 90 degrees, dragging the nerves with it. Consequently, the left vagus nerve shifts to sit primarily on the front of the esophagus, while the right vagus nerve is pulled around to the back. This ancient rotation means that even now, the nerve running down the front of your chest is historically the left nerve, having migrated to accommodate the shifting architecture of your internal organs. Physically, these nerves are surprisingly robust. If you were to view a vagus nerve in isolation, it resembles a thick white shoelace, tough and fibrous. Within that cord are approximately 100,000 individual nerve fibers bundled together. Perhaps the most surprising statistic regarding this anatomy is the direction of the traffic. We tend to assume the brain is the commander, barking orders down to the body. But anatomical studies reveal that 80 to 90% of the vagus nerve fibers are afferent, meaning they carry sensory information from the organs up to the brain. The vast majority of this superhighway is dedicated to the body telling the brain how it feels, rather than the brain telling the body what to do. Before this massive bundle of fibers can reach the lungs or gut, it must first escape the skull.
It exits through a small, kidney-shaped opening at the base of the cranium called the jugular foramen. It does not travel alone. It shares this crowded exit tunnel with the glossy internal jugular vein and two other cranial nerves, packed tightly together like cables in a conduit. Once it clears this bony pass, it enters the carotid sheath, a protective tube of connective tissue in the neck, running alongside the grand carotid arteries, hidden safely beneath the muscle, silently monitoring the rhythm of your life. As it descends through the neck, encased in that protective sheath, the vagus nerve does not remain a single, isolated wire, but begins to demonstrate the immense complexity that defines your internal architecture. It branches almost immediately, sending delicate microscopic tendrils outward to the pharynx and the larynx. This is the neural circuitry that coordinates the complex, often unconscious act of swallowing, ensuring that sustenance slides safely down the esophagus rather than entering the windpipe. It is a safety mechanism operating silently thousands of times a day without you ever needing to command it. One specific branch here, the recurrent laryngeal nerve, takes a famously curious detour. Instead of traveling straight to the voice box, it descends all the way into the chest, loops underneath the arch of the aorta near the heart, and then climbs all the way back up the neck to power your vocal cords. This anatomical loop is a tangible remnant of evolutionary history, a pathway that was direct in our aquatic ancestors, but stretched long and thin as mammals developed distinct necks. Continuing downward, the main trunk of the vagus nerve glides deep into the thorax, slipping behind the root of the lungs. Here, it contributes to the pulmonary plexus, a sophisticated network of nerves regulating the rhythm of your breathing and the width of your airways. It is the direct reason your breath slows and deepens when you feel safe. Simultaneously, branches reach out to the heart, specifically to the sinoatrial node, the natural pacemaker of the cardiac muscle. While the sympathetic nervous system acts as an accelerator for your heartbeat during stress, the vagus nerve acts as the brake, releasing a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine to gently lower your heart rate, facilitating the state of calm necessary for sleep. As the nerve fibers continue their journey past the heart, they undergo a structural transformation. The left and right vagus nerves, previously distinct cables, begin to fracture and weave together, forming a mesh-like net around the esophagus, known as the esophageal plexus. They mix and mingle, trading fibers in a complex braid that wraps the food pipe in a web of neural communication. This mesh ensures that the esophagus contracts in a coordinated wave, a motion called peristalsis, pushing food down toward the stomach. As they near the bottom of the rib cage, these scattered fibers consolidate once more into two main trunks, but they have rotated. The left nerve moves to the front, and the right nerve moves to the back, preparing to cross the boundary of the diaphragm. Passing through the diaphragm along with the esophagus, the nerve enters the abdominal cavity, the true engine room of the gut-brain axis. Here, the scope of its influence becomes staggering. It connects immediately to the celiac plexus, often poetically called the solar plexus, a radiating hub of nerves located just behind the stomach. From this central junction, the vagus nerve fans out like roots seeking water, physically touching nearly every vital organ in your abdomen. It innervates the stomach to stimulate acid production for digestion and reaches the liver to help regulate glucose levels. It extends its reach to the gallbladder, the pancreas, the spleen, and continues down to the small intestine and the beginning of the colon. The name vagus, derived from the Latin for wanderer, is entirely earned here, as no other cranial nerve ventures so far from the brain, physically linking the seat of consciousness with the deep metabolic processes of survival. This connection leads scientists to measure the nerve's health through a concept known as vagal tone. While the word tone might make you think of muscular tension like a flexed bicep or a taut hamstring, in neurology it refers to the continuous low-level flow of electrical impulses traveling down the nerve fibers. It is a measure of signal traffic rather than physical tightness. To assess this internal traffic, researchers rarely monitor the nerve directly, as it is buried too deep within the neck and chest. Instead, they observe the organ it influences most profoundly, the human heart. This relationship reveals a fundamental mechanism of your survival biology. Your heart possesses its own internal pacemaker, known as the sinoatrial node, which is naturally inclined to race. If your heart were completely disconnected from your nervous system, removed from the body for instance, it would default to a rapid intrinsic rhythm of roughly 100 beats per minute. The reason your resting heart rate is likely much slower, perhaps hovering around 60 or 70 beats, is because the vagus nerve is constantly active. It acts as a biological brake pedal. High vagal tone essentially means the nerve is applying steady, calming pressure to the heart's pacemaker, slowing the rhythm, conserving energy, and keeping the engine from overheating. The most accurate way to check the condition of this brake is by measuring heart rate variability, or HRV. This metric presents one of the most surprising paradoxes in human physiology. We often assume that a perfectly healthy heart should beat with the precision of a Swiss watch, with identical, unwavering spacing between every single thump.
However, a heart that beats with rigid, metronomic regularity is actually a sign that the nervous system is stressed, compromised, or aging. It indicates a mechanism that is stuck, unable to adjust to the changing needs of the moment. In a robust, healthy body, the interval between heartbeats varies constantly, specifically in a synchronized dance with your lungs. When you inhale, the vagus nerve briefly lifts its foot off the brake to allow the heart to speed up and circulate oxygen. When you exhale, the nerve reapplies the brake and the heart slows down deep into the resting state. This fluctuation is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and it is the hallmark of a responsive system. A wide variation in the timing between heartbeats means your vagal tone is high and your system is agile. This agility extends far beyond simple mechanics. High vagal tone is strongly linked to emotional stability and psychological resilience. Just as a healthy heart can rapidly switch gears from resting to running, a mind with high vagal tone can effectively switch from stress to safety.
When you face a sudden challenge, the vagal brake releases to mobilize energy, but crucially, it re-engages quickly once the threat has gone. Individuals with low vagal tone often struggle to reapply that brake, leaving them stranded in a state of anxiety or agitation long after a stressful event has ended. It appears that the physical flexibility of your heart rate is the biological foundation for the flexibility of your mood. To understand this flexibility, we must look at the grand architecture of the autonomic nervous system, the silent manager of your internal world. This system is divided into two primary branches that act like a seesaw, constantly tipping back and forth to match the demands of your environment. On one side sits the sympathetic nervous system, often called the fight or flight response, which prepares the body for action by mobilizing energy and sharpening focus. On the other side sits the parasympathetic nervous system, the domain of the vagus nerve, which governs the vital states of rest, digestion, and cellular repair. While many people view these two systems as opposing forces that switch on and off like a light bulb, they function more like a dimmer switch or a precise musical instrument, with both playing a continuous harmony. Even when you are resting, the sympathetic system provides a low hum of alertness to keep you upright, while the parasympathetic system maintains the rhythm of your heart. The mechanism by which the vagus nerve actually slows the heart is a story of chemical elegance that was discovered in a dream. In the early 20th century, a physiologist named Otto Loewy suspected that nerves communicated through chemicals rather than just electrical sparks, but he could not prove it. One night, he dreamed of an experiment, woke up, scribbled it down, and went back to sleep, only to find his notes illegible the next morning. Fortunately, the dream returned the following night. He immediately rushed to his laboratory and performed an experiment on two frog hearts. He stimulated the vagus nerve of the first heart, causing it to beat slower, and then collected the fluid surrounding it. When he applied that fluid to the second heart, which had no nerve stimulation, its beat also slowed down. He had discovered the chemical messenger of the vagus nerve, which he initially called Vagusstoff, or vagus substance. Today, we know this substance as acetylcholine, a powerful neurotransmitter that acts as a natural tranquilizer for your cardiovascular system. When your vagus nerve fires, it releases acetylcholine directly onto the pacemaker cells of your heart, extending the time between beats and allowing the chambers to fill more completely with blood. This chemical handshake is incredibly fast, occurring within milliseconds. In fact, the vagus nerve is so responsive that it can slow your heart rate between a single inhale and exhale, a phenomenon known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. This speed is crucial because unlike the adrenaline-fueled stress response, which circulates in the blood and takes minutes or hours to wash away, the vagus nerve's calming effect is instantaneous. It is a neural brake that can be applied and released beat by beat. This rapid switching capability is what creates the physical sensation of relief. If you can, take a moment to leave a comment describing the last time you felt that distinct, heavy wave of relief wash over you, perhaps after a long journey or finishing a difficult task, because that sensation is actually a tangible biological event. When the brain perceives safety, it lifts the foot off the sympathetic accelerator and engages the vagus brake. The release of acetylcholine triggers a cascade of relaxation. Your pupils constrict to soften your vision. Your salivary glands reactivate, which is why your mouth goes dry when you are nervous and moist when you are relaxed. And your digestive tract begins to gurgle as blood flow is redirected from your muscles back to your internal organs. This redistribution of blood is why you might feel a pleasant heaviness in your limbs or a sudden warmth in your belly. It's the physical evidence that your body has shifted from a state of defense to a state of nourishment.
As this state of nourishment takes hold, the focus of the body's internal management shifts to the center of the chest, where the vagus nerve exerts a profound influence on the rhythm of your life. Deep within the right atrium of the heart sits a small cluster of specialized cells known as the sinoatrial node, often referred to as the heart's natural pacemaker.
There is a fascinating secret about this node that most people never realize. If your heart were removed from the influence of the nervous system entirely, it would naturally beat at a rapid tempo of approximately 100 beats per minute. This is the heart's intrinsic, uninhibited rate, a fast-paced rhythm designed for maximum output. The reason your resting heart rate sits comfortably lower, perhaps around 60 or 70 beats per minute, is entirely due to the vagus nerve acting as a persistent, gentle brake. It is constantly active, releasing a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine directly onto the sinoatrial node to suppress the firing rate. The higher your vagal tone, the more efficiently your body can keep that high-revving engine idling at a sustainable, restorative pace. When you feel stress, the vagus simply lifts its foot off the brake, allowing the heart to zoom back toward its inherent rapid speed without the need for adrenaline to drive it. This braking mechanism creates a beautiful rhythmic phenomenon known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Despite the clinical-sounding name, this is actually a sign of excellent cardiovascular health. It describes the synchronization between your heart rate and your breathing. When you inhale, the vagal brake momentarily lifts, allowing the heart rate to speed up slightly to circulate the oxygen-rich blood. When you exhale, the vagus re-engages the brake, slowing the heart down to conserve energy. This is the biological reason why long, slow exhalations feel so physically relaxing. You are manually triggering the vagus nerve to slow your own heart, creating a tide-like rise and fall in your physiology that signals safety to the brain. Beyond the breath, the vagus nerve manages an even more dramatic survival function known as the mammalian diving reflex. This ancient adaptation is shared with whales, seals, and dolphins, yet it remains dormant but functional within you. When cold water touches the specific sensory nerves around your eyes and nose, a signal travels instantly to the brainstem. The vagus nerve responds by triggering immediate bradycardia, a rapid slowing of the heart rate to preserve oxygen. This happens even if you are not underwater. Simply splashing cold water on your face stimulates this pathway, hacking into the system to force a physiological reset. It serves as a reminder that the vagus is not just a passive monitor, but an active guardian, constantly adjusting the mechanics of your survival based on the environment it senses. This intricate dance between the heart and the nerves lays the groundwork for how your body processes not just physical signals, but emotional ones as well. One of the most immediate ways this emotional processing manifests is through the voice, mediated by a specific branch of the vagus nerve known as the recurrent laryngeal nerve. This particular nerve is famous among anatomists for its peculiar route. Rather than traveling directly from the brainstem to the throat, it descends down into the chest, loops around the major arteries near the heart, and then travels all the way back up the neck to connect with the larynx or voice box. This detour is an evolutionary relic, so pronounced that in a giraffe, the nerve makes a 15-foot detour just to bridge a gap of a few inches. In humans, this winding path physically tethers your voice to the rhythmic pulsing of your cardiovascular system, creating a direct biological link between how your heart feels and how you speak. When the body detects a threat, the vagus nerve withdraws its calming influence, causing the muscles of the throat to tighten instinctively. This tension serves a primitive function, opening the airway for the rapid intake of oxygen needed to run or fight, but it simultaneously stretches the vocal cords thin. This is the physiological reason why, when you are nervous or frightened, your pitch rises or your voice cracks. It is simply the sound of your social engagement system going offline to prioritize immediate survival.
Conversely, when you feel safe, the vagus nerve actively engages the laryngeal muscles to allow for a lower, warmer, and more melodious range of tones. This quality, known as prosody, acts as a wireless signal of safety to anyone listening, triggering their own vagus nerves to relax in response. Fortunately, you can hack this system in reverse. Because the nerve fibers sit so close to the vocal cords, the act of humming creates physical vibrations that mechanically stimulate the vagus nerve. This helps explain why deep chanting, singing, or the rhythmic vibration of a simple om sound feels so soothing. You are essentially massaging your own nervous system from the inside out. This mechanism even extends into the ears. The vagus nerve coordinates with facial nerves to control two tiny muscles in the middle ear, the stapedius and the tensor tympani. Under calm conditions, these muscles tighten the eardrum to filter out low-frequency background noise, like the hum of an air conditioner, and tune the ear specifically to the frequencies of human speech. However, during stress, these muscles go slack to let in low-frequency sounds, which historically alerted us to the approach of predators. This is why when you are anxious, background noise becomes overwhelming and it becomes difficult to follow a conversation. Your ears have physically retuned themselves to listen for danger rather than connection. But while you cannot force your auditory cortex to relax, there is one specific lever in this machinery that you can pull with conscious intent, acting as a manual override for the entire autonomic nervous system.
Breathing is the biologically unique function that bridges the divide between the conscious and the unconscious mind. It is the only system in the body that functions perfectly on autopilot, keeping you alive while you sleep, yet instantly obeys your command the moment you decide to hold your breath or sigh. This dual nature exists because the diaphragm, the primary muscle of respiration, receives signals from two different locations: the metabolic control center in the brainstem, which manages automatic regulation, and the motor cortex, which handles voluntary movement. When you choose to slow your breathing, you are physically manipulating the vagus nerve through mechanical pressure. The vagus nerve passes through the diaphragm alongside the esophagus, moving through a specific opening called the esophageal hiatus. Every time you take a deep diaphragmatic breath, the diaphragm flattens and pushes downward to create space for the lungs, effectively massaging the vagus nerve and stimulating a signal of safety that travels directly to the brain. This creates a physiological feedback loop where the body convinces the mind that it is calm simply because the machinery of breathing is moving slowly. The specific mechanics of this override rely on a phenomenon known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Despite the alarming name, this is a healthy fluctuation where your heart rate increases slightly as you inhale and decreases as you exhale. During inhalation, the pressure in your chest cavity changes, temporarily suppressing the vagus nerve and allowing the sympathetic nervous system to accelerate the heart. During exhalation, that suppression lifts, and the vagus nerve releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine directly onto the heart's pacemaker cells. Acetylcholine acts as a chemical brake, physically slowing the time between heartbeats. This is why a panic attack often involves rapid, short gasps, which emphasize the inhalation and the heart's acceleration, while a state of deep relaxation is characterized by long, slow exhales that emphasize the braking mechanism. To maximize this braking effect, researchers have identified a specific rhythm that synchronizes the heart, lungs, and brain into a state of resonance. The mathematical sweet spot for the human nervous system appears to be breathing at a rate of 5.5 breaths per minute. This equates to inhaling for 5.5 seconds and exhaling for 5.5 seconds. In this specific rhythm, blood pressure assumes a coherent wave pattern that aligns perfectly with heart rate variability, maximizing the efficiency of gas exchange in the alveoli. Fascinatingly,
Researchers analyzing historical patterns found that this 5.5-second rhythm naturally matches the cadence of traditional Buddhist chants and the Latin recitation of the Rosary, suggesting that humans discovered the biological benefits of this specific respiratory timing centuries before we understood the neurology behind it. However, the power of breath extends beyond rhythm. It is also a matter of chemistry. Contrary to popular belief, the urge to breathe is not triggered by a lack of oxygen, but by the buildup of carbon dioxide. Deep, slow breathing increases your tolerance to carbon dioxide, which is crucial because carbon dioxide is actually a vasodilator. It helps widen blood vessels, allowing oxygen to detach from hemoglobin and enter the cells more efficiently, a process known as the Bohr effect. This optimization of oxygen transport sets the stage for a more sophisticated understanding of how we interact with the world, a concept widely known as the polyvagal theory. Before this theory emerged, the nervous system was viewed largely as a binary switch, a simple antagonism between the stressed fight or flight mode and the relaxed rest and digest mode. However, the architecture of your body is actually arranged in a hierarchy based on evolution, functioning less like a switch and more like a ladder of response strategies that dictates how you perceive reality. This pathway utilizes myelinated fibers, which are insulated by a fatty sheath to allow for rapid, precise communication between the brainstem and the heart. When you are in this state, your autonomic nervous system applies a vagal brake to your heart, keeping your heart rate calm without requiring you to lie down or sleep. This is the biological state of safety, and it is anatomically linked to the control of the striated muscles of your face and head. It is a fascinating biological fact that the nerves regulating your heart's rhythm are entangled in the brainstem with the nerves that control your facial expressions, your vocal cords, and even the tiny muscles in your middle ear. When the ventral vagal system is active, your face is mobile and expressive, your voice has prosody and rhythm, and the muscles in your ears tighten to filter out low-frequency background hums so you can specifically hear the frequency of the human voice. This is why a monotone voice or a flat, expressionless face can subconsciously trigger a sense of unease in others. Our biology is hardwired to look for these signals of ventral vagal activity as proof that we are safe. However, if your body detects danger, it slides down the ladder to the second tier, the sympathetic nervous system. The vagal brake releases, causing an immediate acceleration of the heart, and the body prepares for mobilization. In this state, the social engagement system shuts down. The link between the heart and the face is severed temporarily. The facial muscles lose their tone, the voice becomes higher or flatter, and the ears stop filtering for human speech, shifting instead to detect low-frequency sounds associated with predators or threats.
This explains why, when you are stressed, it becomes physically difficult to process what someone is saying to you, and why a neutral face might suddenly look hostile to you. Your nervous system has biased your perception toward threat. If the danger is perceived as life-threatening and mobilization is not an option, the body drops to the bottom rung of the ladder, the dorsal vagal complex. This is the most ancient system, shared with reptiles, which initiates immobilization. It causes a massive drop in heart rate and metabolism, leading to dissociation, fainting, or freezing, effectively shutting down the system to preserve energy. This automatic scanning for safety or danger happens constantly beneath your conscious awareness, a process called neuroception, which relies heavily on signals sent from the organs up to the brain, a mechanism that directly informs the mysterious gut feelings we will explore shortly. These gut feelings are actually the quiet language of your oldest survival system, known as the dorsal vagal complex. While the newer parts of your nervous system separate us from more primitive creatures, the dorsal branch is an evolutionary relic we share with ancient reptiles, remaining largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Anatomically,
This pathway utilizes unmyelinated nerve fibers, meaning the biological cables lack the fatty insulation layer found on newer nerves, causing signals to travel much slower than the lightning-fast impulses of the fight or flight system. When your internal interoception identifies a threat that is too great to fight and too fast to outrun, it bypasses your conscious mind entirely and triggers the dorsal shutdown. This is not a decision you make, it is a reflex as automatic as blinking. This ancient mechanism is the physiological basis of playing dead, a strategy designed for a world where movement could attract a predator's fatal attention. Unlike the adrenaline rush that pumps you up for action, the dorsal vagus acts as a heavy emergency brake, instantly damping down your metabolic resources to preserve energy for pure survival. This massive deceleration is responsible for the common phenomenon of vasovagal syncope, where the heart rate drops so precipitously that blood pressure bottoms out, causing a person to faint. It is the body's way of forcing you into a horizontal position to restore blood flow to the brain, a crude but effective reset button that overrides your will to remain standing. Because this nerve branch wanders deep into the organs situated below the diaphragm, its activation has a drastic effect on the stomach, kidneys, and intestines. When the dorsal freeze initiates, digestion is not merely deprioritized, it is completely arrested. The rhythmic muscular contractions known as peristalsis, which usually move food through your system, stop dead in their tracks. This biological halt prevents the body from wasting vital oxygen on breaking down nutrients during a crisis, akin to a submarine shutting down all non-essential power to run silent and deep. Interestingly, this sudden cessation and potential evacuation of the gut is the biological reality behind the sensation of your stomach dropping as the body purges or locks down any unnecessary weight to prepare for the absolute worst-case scenario. Beyond the gut, this state alters your perception of reality to protect your mind. To help you endure a hopeless situation, the brain triggers a release of endogenous opioids, which are the body's natural painkillers. This creates a state of dissociation, a numbing detachment, where you might feel like you are floating outside your body or watching the scene from a distance. This numbness served our ancestors by minimizing physical suffering if they were caught by a predator, while simultaneously lowering their respiration and heart rate to mimic death, potentially causing the attacker to lose interest. Today, this same ancient wiring activates during moments of extreme shock or inescapable stress, locking the body into a stillness that feels like paralysis, waiting quietly for the subtle internal signal that safety has finally returned. When that internal signal of safety finally returns, the vagus nerve resumes its rhythmic, calming hum, carrying messages not just away from the brain, but deep into the body's center. Here, embedded within the sheath of tissues lining your esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and colon, lies the enteric nervous system. While we typically imagine our neurology is concentrated entirely in our skulls, the gut actually contains approximately 500 million neurons. To put that massive number into perspective, you have 5 times more neurons in your belly than you have in your entire spinal cord. This creates a massive neural mass roughly equivalent to the size of a cat's brain, all distributed along the 9 meters of your digestive tract. The existence of this complexity reveals a startling truth about human biology. You do not have one control center, but 2. The most remarkable feature of this second brain is not its size, however, but its autonomy. If you were to sever the neural connection to your legs, they would become immobile, paralyzed muscles waiting for a signal that can no longer arrive. But the gut is fundamentally different. In laboratory settings, where the vagus nerve connection between the head and the gut is completely severed, the digestive system does not shut down. Because the enteric nervous system has its own reflex circuits, the gut continues to function.
It continues to orchestrate the complex wave-like muscle contractions known as peristalsis, pushing food through the system with precise timing. It manages the secretion of enzymes and the absorption of nutrients entirely on its own, independent of the brain in your skull. This biological independence suggests that the gut was likely our first brain, evolving in primitive ancestors long before the cephalic brain developed to help us navigate the world.
This autonomous system is arranged into two incredibly thin layers of mesh hidden within the gut walls. The first, called the myenteric plexus, sits sandwiched between layers of muscle and is primarily responsible for the mechanics of movement. The second layer, the submucosal plexus, is buried deeper and tasked with monitoring the chemical environment, testing the contents of the gut, and controlling local blood flow. These layers are constantly tasting, testing, and deciding how to handle what you eat, adjusting flow rates and fluid levels without you ever having a conscious thought about it. However, while the gut can function alone, it constantly communicates with the head brain via the vagus nerve. What is most surprising about this hotline is the direction of the conversation. Anatomical studies revealed that about 90% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are carrying information up from the gut to the brain rather than down from the brain to the gut. This means that in the daily dialogue between your two brains, your gut is doing far more talking than listening. This dominance of upward communication changes our understanding of human biology entirely. We tend to view the brain as a lonely monarch issuing commands from a tower, but in reality, the brain is more of a listener, constantly eavesdropping on the chemical whispers of the stomach and intestines. This specific flow of data, traveling from the visceral organs up to the brainstem, constitutes a sensory system known as interoception. While exteroception helps you navigate the world outside, seeing light or hearing sound, interoception helps you navigate the world inside. The vagus nerve acts as the primary fiber optic cable for this internal sense. It is constantly monitoring the mechanical state of your organs, such as how stretched your stomach lining is after a meal, and the chemical state, such as the presence of inflammatory markers or specific nutrients. This leads to a profound realization about our emotions. Because these fibers terminate in the brain's emotional centers, including the limbic system, the physical state of your gut directly alters your mood. When we say we have a gut feeling, we are not using a metaphor. We are describing a physiological reality where the vagus nerve is transmitting a sense of safety or danger from the abdomen to the mind. If your gut detects inflammation or imbalance, it sends a low-level alarm signal up the vagus nerve. Instead, the brain translates this visceral noise into a general sense of impending doom, anxiety, or unease. This mechanic upends the long-held myth that the brain is the sole author of our emotional lives. We frequently search for psychological reasons to explain why we feel down or anxious, scanning our recent memories for social slip-ups or work stress. However, science suggests that in many instances, the brain is simply writing a story to explain a signal that originated physically in the digestive tract. You might not be anxious because of your life circumstances. You might be feeling the neural translation of a disruption in your microbiome. The brain is effectively hallucinating an emotional state based on the raw data provided by the vagus nerve. Furthermore, this data cable is sensitive enough to distinguish between different types of nutrients. Specialized cells in the gut lining, called neuropods, can synapse directly with the vagus nerve. This means your gut can taste what is inside it and send a report to the brain in milliseconds, faster than any hormone could travel through the bloodstream. It is a continuous, silent conversation that shapes your perception of reality from the bottom up, proving that the boundary between your mind and your body is far more permeable than it appears. This permeable boundary is nowhere more active than in the deepest reaches of the digestive tract, where an ecosystem exists that is so vast and complex it functions almost like an alien planet within you.
This is the microbiome, a sprawling, microscopic metropolis that influences nearly every aspect of your biology, yet remains largely invisible to the naked eye. Current estimates suggest there are approximately 39 trillion bacterial cells residing in the average human body, a number that quietly staggers the imagination. To put that figure in perspective, the number of human cells that make up your tissues and organs is roughly 30 trillion, meaning that by a strict head count, you are actually slightly more bacteria than you are human. For decades, scientists believed the ratio was 10 to 1, but even the revised, more conservative 1 to 1 ratio implies that half of the living cells walking around in your shoes do not actually belong to your species. This internal population is not a monolith, but a diverse society populated by up to 1,000 different species, each with a specialized trade and a distinct genetic profile. While human DNA is roughly 99.9% identical from person to person, the gut microbiome can be 80 to 90% different between two individuals, making your internal bacterial signature almost as unique as a fingerprint. These trillions of residents possess a collective genome that is 150 times larger than the human genome, providing a vast library of genes that produce enzymes your body could never make on its own. It's a symbiotic arrangement refined over millions of years of evolution, where the host provides shelter and the tenants pay rent in the form of biochemical labor.
Some of these microscopic citizens act as builders, maintaining the mucus lining of the intestinal wall to prevent leaks that could trigger system-wide inflammation. Others function as chemists, breaking down complex carbohydrates from plants that the human stomach cannot digest, converting them into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which serves as the primary fuel source for the cells lining your colon. Beyond digestion, this metropolis functions as a pharmaceutical factory, synthesizing essential nutrients like vitamin B12 and vitamin K, which are critical for blood clotting and energy levels, proving that your body has effectively outsourced vital survival tasks to these tiny organisms. The conversation between these bacteria and the enteric nervous system is perhaps the most profound aspect of this partnership. Microbes release signaling molecules that can permeate the gut wall and stimulate the vagus nerve directly, sending rapid-fire messages to the brainstem. They're even capable of producing neurotransmitters identical to the ones your brain uses, including gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, and dopamine. This chemical influence might explain why distinct physical sensations often accompany strong emotions, blurring the line between a biological reaction and a feeling. It makes one wonder how often a sudden shift in mood is actually a signal rising from this deep internal ecosystem. I would love to know if you have ever experienced a gut feeling so strong it felt like physical knowledge rather than just a thought, and if you listened to it at the time. Research into this signaling suggests that 95% of the body's serotonin is found in the bowel, not the brain. While this gut-derived serotonin does not cross the blood-brain barrier, it acts locally to regulate digestion and signals the nerve endings to send emotional reports upstream. The bacteria can even manipulate your behavior to ensure their own survival. Species that thrive on sugar can trigger cravings that compel you to seek out sweets, effectively hacking your appetite to feed themselves. This means that the bacteria in your gut are not just passengers, but active participants in the daily operation of your mind. They achieve this largely by hijacking the vagus nerve, the primary information superhighway that runs from the abdomen directly to the brainstem. While we usually imagine this nerve as a passive sensor, simply reporting on fullness or nausea, bacteria can use it as a control stick. By releasing chemical signaling molecules that mimic your body's own neurotransmitters, they stimulate the vagus nerve to alter your taste receptors. This biological sleight of hand can make sugar taste more intense or vegetables seem less appealing, effectively training you to act as their personal delivery service.
The evidence for this connection is compelling. In studies where the communication line of the vagus nerve is severed, this microbial influence over cravings often evaporates, leaving the host in full control of their dietary choices once again. But the relationship is not purely parasitic. When fed the right materials, specifically complex fibers found in plants, these bacterial colonies engage in a process called fermentation that acts as a generator for human health. As they break down fiber, which your own cells cannot digest, they release powerful byproducts known as short-chain fatty acids, the most famous being butyrate. Butyrate is a multi-purpose tool for the body. It nourishes the cells lining the colon, seals the gut barrier to prevent leakage, and incredibly, enters the bloodstream to travel upward. Once it reaches the brain, it helps reinforce the blood-brain barrier, that critical shield that protects your neurons from toxins and inflammation. This chemical manufacturing capability leads us to the emerging revolution of psychobiotics. This is a new class of probiotics specifically studied for their ability to alter mood and behavior. It turns out that your gut is a primary factory for mental health chemicals. Roughly 90% of the body's serotonin, the molecule responsible for feelings of well-being and happiness, is produced in the digestive tract, often modulated by spore-forming bacteria. Furthermore, specific strains like Lactobacillus rhamnosus have been observed to secrete vast amounts of GABA, a neurotransmitter that acts as the brain's natural brake pedal, calming overactive firing and reducing anxiety. In animal models, the introduction of this single strain was enough to visibly lower stress behaviors and reduce the amount of cortisol circulating in the blood. Another strain, Bifidobacterium longum, has been linked to improved cognitive function and a reduction in the frantic mental chatter we associate with stress. This implies that the difference between a calm day and an anxious one might not always stem from external events, but from the ratio of microscopic inhabitants currently winning the turf war in your intestines. These bacterial puppeteers are not merely surviving inside you, they are painting the lens through which you view the world. By adjusting the chemical composition of your blood, they can shift your perception of stress, creating a biological buffer that makes the world feel safer or, conversely, more threatening depending on which species are thriving. To manage this thriving population, your body has stationed the vast majority of its defense forces directly along the intestinal wall. It's a startling biological reality that approximately 70% of your entire immune system resides within your gut. This concentration of force is necessary because the digestive tract represents the largest interface between your internal biology and the external environment. Every time you eat, you're bringing a piece of the outside world into your body, and your immune system must instantly decide whether to welcome it as fuel or attack it as pathogen. This complex network is known as the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or GALT.
Within this system, particularly in the lower small intestine, lie specialized surveillance hubs called Peyer's patches. You might view these patches as biological border control stations. They monitor the bacterial populations, constantly sampling the contents of the gut to distinguish between friendly commensal bacteria and potentially dangerous invaders. It is here, in the quiet folds of your intestines, that your immune cells receive their education. They are trained to practice tolerance, learning to ignore harmless food proteins and beneficial microbes while remaining ready to strike against true threats. Separating this intense immune activity from the chaos of the digestive tract is a physical barrier that is surprisingly delicate. The lining of your gut, the epithelium, is only one single layer of cells thick. If you were to flatten out this lining, it would cover the surface area of a small studio apartment, yet the wall itself is thinner than a sheet of paper. To protect these cells, the body produces a thick coat of mucus, a demilitarized zone that keeps the bacteria at a safe distance from your own tissues.
The cells that make up this thin wall are stitched together by complex protein structures known as tight junctions. Under a microscope, these junctions look somewhat like the stitching on a piece of fabric, or perhaps the teeth of a zipper, holding the cells firmly together so that nutrients must pass through the cells rather than slipping between them. However, this barrier is dynamic. It is designed to open and close slightly to allow water and nutrients to pass. A specific protein called zonulin acts as the regulator for these gates. When zonulin is released, often triggered by certain proteins in wheat or by the presence of harmful bacteria, the tight junctions loosen. When these junctions remain open for too long, the barrier is compromised. This allows things that should remain in the digestive tract to drift into the sterile environment of the bloodstream. Microscopic food particles and bacterial toxins, specifically a compound called lipopolysaccharide, slip through the open gates. Because these toxins are parts of bacterial cell walls, your immune system immediately identifies them as a sign of infection, even if there is no live bacteria present. The result is a low-grade systemic inflammation. The immune system releases chemical messengers called cytokines, which travel through the blood and eventually communicate with the brain. This is where the gut-brain connection becomes tangible. These inflammatory signals tell the brain that the body is under stress, which suppresses the production of serotonin and dopamine. Consequently, a physical issue in the gut lining is often felt not as a stomachache, but as a mental state, manifesting as brain fog, fatigue, or a sudden unexplained shift in mood, effectively changing the weather pattern of your mind from the bottom up.
If a young developing system is exposed to high levels of environmental stress, the microbiome adjusts its population accordingly, often permanently reducing the number of beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus. This early calibration creates a gut-brain axis that is more reactive to stress decades later, meaning that a difficult Tuesday at the office in your 30s may trigger a biological reaction that was actually encoded in your digestive system when you were 5. To understand why your stomach remembers what your mind might forget, we have to look backward, long before human memory existed. In the grand timeline of life, the brain in your head is actually the newer invention. The neural network in your gut evolved first. In primitive, tube-shaped organisms floating in ancient oceans, the primary biological mandate was simply to process fuel. There was no need for philosophy or calculus, but there was a desperate need to manage the rhythmic contraction of digestion and the absorption of energy. So nature built the enteric nervous system hundreds of millions of years ago, giving the gut its own autonomy long before the central nervous system developed to manage the rest of the body. This network is so complex that it contains more neurons than the spinal cord, roughly 500 million of them, allowing it to operate entirely on its own if the connection to the head were severed. This priority makes sense when you consider that eating is arguably the most dangerous thing an organism does. Every time you swallow, you are introducing a piece of the outside world into your gentle inner ecosystem. That outside world is filled with bacteria, viruses, and potential toxins. If your body waited for the brain in your skull to consciously analyze every bite for poison, the reaction time would be too slow to prevent infection. The gut needed its own on-site intelligence, a security team capable of making life or death decisions in milliseconds. Think of the gut lining as a vast internal sensory organ, the largest interface between you and the environment. When that security team detects a toxin, perhaps a berry that has gone bad or a pathogen hiding in water, it sends a high-priority distress signal up the vagus nerve to a specific region in the brainstem.
Uniquely, this small area has a thinner blood-brain barrier than the rest of the brain, allowing it to sample the bloodstream directly for chemical threats. Once triggered, this center overrides every other conscious desire you have, forcing the body to purge the threat. It is a violent, unpleasant mechanism, but it is also one of the oldest and most effective ways nature devised to keep your ancestors alive long enough to reproduce. What is truly remarkable is that these two brains, one designed for survival and the other for thought, speak the exact same language. For a long time, science assumed that neurotransmitters were the exclusive province of the skull, but we now know that the gut is a chemical factory of staggering proportions. It produces the same dopamine that makes you feel motivation and the same gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, that helps you relax. The chemical signaling is so identical that the gut doesn't just mimic the brain, it actively supplies the raw materials for your mood. But of all the chemicals the gut produces, one stands out as the master key to this hidden relationship. We often describe serotonin as the brain's own happiness drug, the molecule responsible for feelings of well-being, stability, and calm. Yet, if you were to take a biological inventory of your body, you would find that the brain is essentially serotonin poor compared to what lies below. It is a staggering physiological fact that approximately 95% of the body's serotonin is not found in the skull, but is manufactured and stored within the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. The sheer volume of this production suggests that the gut is not just a food processor, but a primary chemical organ with an emotional agenda of its own. This massive reservoir is managed by specialized workers called enterochromaffin cells. These fascinating sensory cells are scattered throughout the delicate lining of the digestive system, acting as chemical tasters and monitors. They detect nutrients, irritants, and signals from the trillions of bacteria living within you. When they sense the presence of food, they release serotonin into the intestinal wall to coordinate the rhythmic contractions known as peristalsis, moving digestion along like a complex rhythmic conveyor belt. But their role extends far beyond simple mechanics. Here we encounter a strange biological firewall that often confuses those studying the system. You might assume that this gut-derived serotonin travels up the bloodstream to bathe the brain in happiness, but biology is rarely so direct. The blood-brain barrier is a strict gatekeeper, and it forbids serotonin from crossing. The happy chemical made in your stomach is physically trapped there. It cannot simply float up to your head. This seems like a design flaw until you realize the gut isn't trying to ship the chemical, it is trying to send a signal. The serotonin in the gut acts as a local messenger that speaks directly to the vagus nerve. The nerve endings of the vagus nerve penetrate the gut lining, sitting in close proximity to those serotonin-producing cells. When the gut releases serotonin, it activates these nerve fibers, sending distinct electrical impulses rushing up the vagus highway into the brainstem. The brain translates these signals into emotions. It's a game of telephone where the gut whispers a chemical code and the brain interprets it as a feeling of safety, satiety, or unease. This deep integration explains a phenomenon that has baffled patients for decades.
When people take selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, to treat depression or anxiety, the most common side effects are often nausea or gastric distress. This happens because the medication does not know how to target the brain exclusively. Since the vast majority of your serotonin receptors are located in the digestive tract, not the brain, the drug amplifies signaling in the gut just as much as it does in the head. It stimulates movement and sensitivity in the stomach, proving that the two systems are inextricably linked by the same chemical language. Furthermore, this connection reveals why our emotions often feel so physical.
Evolution likely placed this machinery here as a survival tactic long before it was used for complex moods. Originally, gut serotonin was a poison detector. If the enterochromaffin cells detect a toxin or spoiled food, they dump massive amounts of serotonin into the system instantly. This chemical flood triggers the nerves to initiate vomiting or diarrhea to purge the threat. In this light, the chemical that brings us peace is the same one that protects us from harm, linking our highest emotional states to our most basic survival instincts. While serotonin manages our mood and defense, another crucial neurotransmitter relies heavily on this enteric system to function. We often think of dopamine as the brain's reward molecule, the spark that drives ambition, focus, and the pursuit of pleasure. However, roughly half of the body's dopamine is synthesized not in the cranial vault, but deep within the gastrointestinal tract. This fact challenges the long-held assumption that motivation is purely a cerebral event, disconnected from the rest of the body's biology. It is important to distinguish how this chemical operates in different locations. Dopamine produced in the gut does not simply cross the blood-brain barrier to give you a rush of excitement directly. Instead, it operates locally to manage muscle contractions and mucosal defense, while simultaneously signaling the brain indirectly through the vagus nerve. This connection is vital because it means the state of your gut directly influences your capacity for motivation. When the digestive system is functioning optimally, it sends a steady stream of sensory data upward, which the brain interprets as a green light to expend energy on goals. Conversely, when the gut is inflamed or unbalanced, the vagus nerve conveys a signal of caution, which we often experience psychologically as lethargy, brain fog, or a lack of drive. This relationship is heavily mediated by the microbiome. Specific strains of bacteria, including lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, act as microscopic factories that secrete dopamine precursors. In the scientific community, these are sometimes referred to as psychobiotics because of their potential to alter mental states. When these bacterial colonies are thriving, they produce enough chemical precursors to lower the activation energy required for the brain to feel motivated. Essentially, a healthy gut flora helps lower the friction of starting a difficult task. The profound link between the gut's dopamine system and the brain is perhaps most starkly illustrated by the pathology of Parkinson's disease. For decades, medicine viewed Parkinson's strictly as a degenerative brain disorder characterized by the loss of dopamine-producing neurons in the substantia nigra. Yet, newer evidence points to a startling origin story for many cases. It is now understood that the pathological clumps of protein, known as Lewy bodies, often appear in the nerves of the gut years or even decades before they appear in the brain. Scientists have traced a potential path where these misfolded proteins form in the digestive tract and slowly migrate upward along the vagus nerve fibers, like climbers ascending a rope, until they eventually reach the midbrain. This explains why chronic constipation and other digestive issues are often one of the very earliest warning signs of the condition, appearing long before the characteristic tremors or stiffness. This insight has revolutionized neurology, suggesting that protecting the dopamine neurons in the brain may actually begin with preserving the integrity of the gut lining. It forces a reconsideration of the body as a unified loop, where the impulse to move and achieve is chemically tethered to the systems that digest and absorb. While dopamine drives the urge to seek and acquire, the brain requires an equally powerful counterbalance to prevent the machinery from overheating. This brings us to the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter known as GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid. If dopamine and glutamate are the gas pedals of the nervous system, initiating action and alertness, GABA is the brake. It is the chemical messenger of tranquility. When a neuron releases GABA, it crosses the synaptic gap and binds to receptors on a neighboring cell, essentially telling that cell to relax. Technically, it opens channels that allow negatively charged chloride ions to flow into the neuron, making it less responsive to new stimuli. This process quiets the electrical storms of the mind, allowing for sleep, relaxation, and the cessation of anxiety. Without this vital braking mechanism, the brain would remain in a state of constant chaotic firing. For decades, neuroscientists believed that the brain produced all the GABA it needed within its own protective walls. However, the exploration of the gut-brain axis has revealed a surprising external supplier. Specific strains of bacteria residing in the human intestine, particularly those from the Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium families, are capable of synthesizing GABA directly from the food you eat. These microscopic organisms are effectively manufacturing anti-anxiety compounds within the digestive tract, converting dietary glutamate into the very molecule that helps you sleep. This discovery challenges the notion of emotional regulation as a purely cerebral event.
This presents a biological puzzle, however, because GABA produced in the gut cannot easily cross the blood-brain barrier to enter the skull. It is chemically unable to pass through the tight junctions that protect the brain from the bloodstream. The solution lies, once again, with the vagus nerve. In landmark studies, researchers found that when the gut is populated with GABA-producing Lactobacillus rhamnosus, subjects display significantly fewer signs of stress and fear. But if the vagus nerve is severed, this calming effect vanishes instantly. The bacteria are not sending the chemical into the brain. They are using the chemical to stimulate the vagus nerve endings in the gut lining, sending a coded electrical message of calm up the neck and into the brainstem. It implies that a portion of our personality, specifically our ability to remain cool under pressure, is maintained by the silent passengers living within us. Yet, while neurotransmitters like GABA and dopamine handle these immediate, fast-acting electrical signals, the body also relies on a much slower, rhythmic system to manage energy over long periods. This brings us to the endocrine system, where the hidden clocks of the body are governed not by electricity, but by the slow-moving tides of circadian hormones. At the very center of these tides is a tripartite command structure that acts as the grand conductor of human energy, known to physiologists as the HPA axis. This stands for the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis, a complex feedback loop that links the deepest, most ancient parts of your brain directly to the glands sitting atop your kidneys. When the hypothalamus perceives a need for action, whether from a sudden noise or simply the biological requirement to wake up, it releases a chemical messenger that travels a short distance to the pituitary gland. The pituitary, acting as a master translator, sends a distinct signal down through the bloodstream to the adrenal cortex, which ultimately releases cortisol. While popular culture has branded cortisol almost exclusively as the stress hormone, painting it as a villain to be banished, this is a profound misunderstanding of its primary function. In a healthy body, cortisol is actually the chemical of wakefulness. There is a phenomenon known as the cortisol awakening response, where levels of this hormone surge by nearly 50% in the first 30 minutes after you open your eyes. This is not a panic response, but rather a biological ignition sequence. It liberates glucose into the bloodstream, sharpens cognitive function, and raises blood pressure just enough to get you out of bed and moving. Without this morning peak, you would remain in a state of sleep inertia, unable to shake off the fog of the night. It is the body's internal sunrise, timed perfectly with the rhythm of the day. Beyond merely waking you up, this system possesses a surprising dual nature regarding your immune system. Cortisol is one of the most potent anti-inflammatory substances the body produces. When you apply hydrocortisone cream to a bug bite, you are mimicking this exact mechanism. In the bloodstream, cortisol tells the immune system to conserve resources and stop attacking. effectively cooling down the heat of inflammation. This is a survival trade-off. During moments of high exertion or perceived danger, the body pauses long-term repair projects like fighting infection to prioritize immediate energy for muscles and the brain. However, this system relies on a delicate golden balance. The brain itself helps regulate the HPA axis through a negative feedback loop, specifically involving the hippocampus, the area responsible for memory and learning. The hippocampus is covered in receptors that taste the blood for cortisol, telling the hypothalamus when to shut the production line down. But here lies a strange biological paradox. If cortisol levels remain high for too long, they become neurotoxic to the very region meant to monitor them. Chronic exposure causes the neurons in the hippocampus to shrink and disconnect, effectively withering the brain's ability to turn off the stress response. Conversely, a system that produces too little cortisol leaves the body defenseless against its own immune system. Without the dampening effect of this hormone, inflammation can run wild, leading to autoimmunity and profound fatigue. The HPA axis acts less like a simple on-off switch and more like a thermostat, constantly making micro-adjustments to ensure the temperature of your physiology is neither too hot with inflammation nor too cold with suppression. It's a hidden negotiation happening every second, ensuring the energy you need is available exactly when you need it, before slowly receding to allow for rest. At the center of this caloric economy sits the pancreas, a leaf-shaped organ tucked discreetly behind the stomach that acts as the body's primary fuel sensor. It contains specialized clusters of cells known as the islets of Langerhans, which constantly taste the bloodstream to measure glucose levels with incredible precision. When these sensors detect fuel, they release insulin, a hormone that functions remarkably like a physical key, unlocking the microscopic doors on your cell walls to let energy inside. What is often overlooked is that this system operates on a strict timetable aligned with the rotation of the Earth. Your ability to process food is not static, it oscillates in a predictable wave. Research into circadian biology reveals that insulin sensitivity is naturally highest in the morning, meaning your body is most efficient at absorbing and utilizing energy shortly after waking. As the sun traverses the sky, this efficiency slowly wanes. By the time darkness falls, your pancreas becomes chemically sluggish, a deliberate biological state intended to discourage energy storage during the hours reserved for sleep. This creates a hidden conflict when we eat late at night. The hormone melatonin, which rises to prepare you for sleep, actively binds to insulin-secreting cells to suppress them. The body is trying to shut down the engine, but a late meal forces the pancreas to wake up and work against the tide of melatonin, resulting in much higher blood sugar levels than the same meal would cause at breakfast. This mismatch disrupts the release of growth hormone, which is the primary agent of cellular repair and typically peaks during deep sleep, but only if insulin levels are low. Much of this tightly regulated fuel is destined for a single voracious consumer. Despite occupying only about 2% of your total body mass, the human brain demands a staggering 20% of your daily caloric intake just to maintain consciousness. Unlike your muscles, which can store reserves of carbohydrates as glycogen or burn fat when supplies run low, the brain is notoriously picky. It cannot easily burn fat for fuel and lacks any significant storage capacity of its own, making it entirely dependent on a continuous second-by-second stream of glucose from the blood. This immense energy cost is due to the electricity of thought. The brain maintains billions of neurons that are constantly firing, and to reset these neurons after every signal, it uses tiny molecular pumps that push sodium and potassium ions in and out of the cell membranes. These pumps alone account for nearly 2/3 of the brain's energy budget. It is a biological paradox that the organ responsible for your dreams and memories is, on a chemical level, simply trying to keep its electrical gradient from collapsing. To ensure this greedy organ never starves, the body has evolved a failsafe.
If blood sugar drops too low, the brain will trigger an intense stress response, releasing adrenaline to liberate stored sugar from the liver, prioritizing its own survival above all else. While that emergency adrenaline rush is a last resort, your body prefers a more rhythmic, predictable approach to fueling the machine. The first is ghrelin, a peptide hormone produced primarily by specialized cells lining the fundus of the stomach, as well as the epsilon cells of the pancreas. It is the only known circulating hormone that directly stimulates appetite, acting as a dinner bell for the central nervous system. When your stomach is empty, ghrelin levels rise sharply, traveling through the bloodstream to cross the blood-brain barrier. It docks at receptors in the hypothalamus, the command center for instinctual drives, effectively shouting that the fuel tank is running low. Interestingly, the name ghrelin technically comes from its role as a growth hormone-releasing peptide, but many scientists use the mnemonic growling to remember its function, as its release often coincides with the audible rumbles of an empty gut. But a switch needs an off position to prevent endless consumption. This countersignal comes from an unlikely source, your body fat. For a long time, adipose tissue was viewed merely as passive storage, like a pantry for excess energy. Derived from the Greek word leptos, meaning thin, leptin circulates at levels proportional to your body fat mass. It whispers to the brain that energy stores are sufficient, inhibiting the neurons that stimulate hunger and allowing you to feel satisfied enough to push the plate away. In a perfectly rested body, these two hormones dance in a self-regulating harmony. However, modern life has introduced a glitch in this ancient software: sleep deprivation. When you shorten your rest, this delicate axis falls into chaos. Research consistently shows that restricting sleep causes ghrelin levels to spike, creating an artificial sense of starvation, while simultaneously crashing leptin levels, removing the chemical stop signal. The brain, panicked by the perceived lack of energy, doesn't just ask for food, it demands high-calorie, quick energy sources. This is why a tired brain rarely craves celery or plain water. It specifically activates the endocannabinoid system, the same receptors involved in the munchies, making sugary and fatty foods appear significantly more rewarding than they would after a full night of rest. I would be interested in knowing if you have ever noticed that specific craving for midnight snacks when you stay up too late, or if you find yourself hungrier the day after a poor sleep. Let me know down in the comments. This mechanism suggests that sleep is not just about brain maintenance, but is a fundamental pillar of metabolic health, regulating weight and energy balance just as much as diet and exercise do. This orchestration is directed by a tiny rice-sized region situated deep within the hypothalamus, often referred to as the body's master clock. This is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, and despite controlling the timing of virtually every cell in your body, it comprises only about 20,000 neurons. To put that in perspective, the human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, making this crucial command center incredibly small, roughly the size of a pinhead. Its name, suprachiasmatic, literally describes its location. It sits directly above the optic chiasm, the point where the optic nerves from your eyes cross over each other. This location is not accidental, it is a matter of hardwired necessity. If you were to live in a cave with absolutely no sunlight and watches, an experiment famously conducted by isolation researchers, your body would still maintain a rhythm. However, it wouldn't be exactly 24 hours.
Left to its own devices, the human internal clock actually runs slightly slower, averaging about 24 hours and 11 minutes. This natural drift, known as the free running period, means that without external cues, your sleep schedule would push forward by a few minutes every single day, eventually flipping your days and nights entirely within a few weeks. While temperature, meals, and physical activity all act as minor time givers, light is the absolute sovereign. The connection between light and your internal clock is distinct from your normal vision. You have specialized cells in your eyes that have nothing to do with seeing shapes, motion, or colors.
These are intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and they contain a unique photopigment called melanopsin. These cells have a direct, hardwired hotline to the SCN called the retinohypothalamic tract. When blue spectrum light hits these cells, they fire an immediate signal to the master clock, effectively saying, "It is day," which instantly suppresses melatonin production and advances the timing of the clock. This pathway is so distinct from visual sight that many people who are completely blind can still maintain a synchronized circadian rhythm because these specific light-sensing cells often remain functional even when the rods and cones for vision do not. Inside the neurons of the SCN, the ticking of the clock is actually a genetic loop. Genes known specifically as clock and BMAL1 promote the production of proteins that eventually build up enough to shut off their own production. This feedback loop of protein creation and degradation takes approximately 24 hours to complete, providing the mechanical tick-tock of your biological existence at a cellular level. While the SCN is the conductor, it isn't the only musician in the orchestra. We now know that nearly every organ and tissue in your body possesses its own peripheral clock. Your liver, your pancreas, and even your skin cells have their own molecular timers that handle local business. Problems arise when the conductor and the orchestra are playing different songs, a state known as internal desynchronization. If you eat a heavy meal at 2 a.m., your liver clock wakes up and starts processing, signaling that it is daytime, while the SCN, judging by the lack of light, insists it is deep night. This confusion between the master clock and peripheral clocks is currently viewed as a primary driver of the health issues associated with shift work and chronic jet lag. At the heart of this intricate timing system lies a molecule that is often misunderstood. While you might see melatonin sold in bottles as a sleep aid, within the body it is not actually a sedative. It does not possess the chemical power to knock you unconscious in the way an anesthetic or a strong tranquilizer might. Instead, chronobiologists refer to melatonin as the hormone of darkness, or a chemical signal of the night. It functions less like a switch that turns off the brain and more like the starter pistol for a race, signaling to every organ in the body that the active phase of the day has concluded and the recovery phase has begun. This chemical messenger originates in the pineal gland, a structure no larger than a grain of rice located deep in the exact center of the human brain. Throughout history, this tiny gland has held a place of mystical significance. The philosopher René Descartes famously described it as the seat of the soul, believing it was the precise point where the physical body and the mind connected. In evolutionary terms, the pineal gland is often called the third eye. In certain species of reptiles and amphibians, this gland still sits on top of the skull, just under the skin, and detects light directly, acting as a functional eye to track the sun. In humans, the gland has retreated deep into the skull for protection, yet it remains intimately connected to vision. When blue light from the sun or a screen hits your retina, a nerve signal travels to the master clock, which then clamps down on the pineal gland, physically preventing it from releasing melatonin. It is only when that blue light fades that the brake is released. Scientists call the specific moment your levels begin to rise the dim light melatonin onset, or DLMO. This is your body's internal twilight, usually occurring about 2 hours before your natural sleep time, creating a window of opportunity where sleep becomes physiologically easier to initiate. However, this rising tide of darkness does more than just make your eyelids heavy. It fundamentally alters how your metabolism processes energy, which brings us to a critical interaction between sleep and digestion. As melatonin levels climb in the evening, they communicate directly with the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas. The hormone effectively tells the pancreas to stop working for the night. The evolutionary logic here is sound. Historically, humans did not hunt or forage while sleeping, so the machinery for processing sugar was shut down to conserve energy. But this ancient mechanism creates a modern conflict. If you consume a heavy, sugar-rich meal late at night when your melatonin is already high, your body struggles to produce enough insulin to manage the influx of glucose. The sugar stays in your blood much longer than it would during the day, which explains why shift workers and chronic late-night eaters face significantly higher risks of metabolic disorders. The presence of melatonin essentially renders the body temporarily diabetic as a natural part of the sleep cycle, assuming you will be fasting until morning.
But as the night ends, this metabolic safety lock must be broken to prepare you for movement and activity. As soon as your eyes open, a distinct and powerful biological sequence is triggered, known as the cortisol awakening response. While cortisol is often maligned in popular culture as strictly a stress hormone, this morning pulse is actually a life-sustaining necessity, acting less like a panic signal and more like a starter motor for your entire physiological engine. Within the first 30 to 45 minutes of waking, your cortisol levels do not just rise gently, they surge, increasing by anywhere from 50 to 75% compared to the moment you first opened your eyes. This sharp spike is unrelated to the stress of your upcoming day or your emotional state. It is a hardwired reflex orchestrated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which sends an immediate command down the vagus nerve and spinal cord to the adrenal glands perched atop your kidneys. The message is simple: mobilize fuel immediately. Because you have not eaten for several hours, your blood sugar is naturally low. This cortisol surge liberates stored glucose from your liver and floods it into the bloodstream, reversing the insulin-resistant state of the night and providing the raw energy required to shake off sleep inertia. It is the body serving itself a chemical breakfast before you have even taken your first bite of food. Without this aggressive ramp-up, the transition from the paralyzed state of REM sleep to upright alertness would be nearly impossible, leaving you in a prolonged state of confusion and physical heaviness. Interestingly, this system is capable of anticipation. Research suggests that when you have a specific time you need to wake up, perhaps for an early flight or an important meeting, your pituitary gland begins secreting the precursor to cortisol, the adrenocorticotropic hormone, about an hour before you actually wake up. Your brain creates a chemical ramp, gradually lifting you out of deep sleep so that the final awakening is less jarring. This helps explain why, on days when you are anxious about oversleeping, you might find yourself snapping awake exactly 1 minute before your alarm triggers. The magnitude of this morning response is also a key indicator of your overall vitality. A robust surge is linked to better verbal memory and a brighter mood throughout the afternoon, whereas a blunted or flat response is often observed in those suffering from burnout or chronic fatigue. It is a crucial daily reboot, a system check that ensures the machine is ready to run. However, cortisol is not working alone in this process. It is inextricably linked to the slow, rhythmic rise of your core body temperature. While that core temperature shift signals the start of the day for your brain, a far more complex negotiation is happening throughout the rest of your anatomy. For decades, scientists believed the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus was the only clock that mattered, a solitary timekeeper dictating the schedule to a passive body. But we now know that this is entirely untrue. Almost every single cell in your body, from the lining of your heart to the follicles of your hair, possesses its own set of clock genes. These represent a molecular feedback loop involving proteins usually referred to as period and cryptochromes, which rise and fall in a precise 24-hour cycle within the cytoplasm of the cell itself. In this way, you were not merely one clock, you were billions of tiny biological watches ticking in unison, creating a grand cellular orchestra.
Nowhere is this independence more striking than in the liver. While the master clock in your brain is primarily entrained by photons of sunlight entering the eyes, the clock in your liver is primarily set by the arrival of food. This creates a fascinating potential for conflict within the system. If you eat a heavy meal at 2 in the morning, your brain, sensing darkness, is shouting that it is time to rest, but your liver, detecting calories, winds its clock to the start of a new activity cycle. This misalignment is essentially a state of internal confusion where different organs physically behave as if they exist in different time zones. Your skin, the body's largest organ, maintains a particularly rigorous schedule of its own. During the daylight hours, skin cells operate in what researchers call defense mode. They thicken slightly, adjust their pH, and ramp up the production of sebum and antioxidants to protect against UV radiation, pollution, and bacterial invasion. As the sun goes down, the skin shifts dramatically into repair mode. Cell division, or mitosis, peaks around midnight, and blood flow to the skin increases to flush out metabolic waste products accumulated during the day. Interestingly, the skin's permeability is higher at night, losing more water but also absorbing more from the surface, which implies that the body is structurally evolved to repair and intake moisture while you sleep. When these peripheral clocks drift away from the master clock, we experience the groggy, disjointed sensation known as jet lag. It is not merely fatigue from travel, it's a physiological decoupling. Your stomach might think it's dinner time while your kidneys are powering down for the night, and your heart rate variability is anticipating dawn while your brain is demanding sleep. This phenomenon also occurs frequently without travel, a condition known as social jet lag.
When you wake up at 6 in the morning on weekdays, but sleep until 11 on weekends, you are effectively flying across several time zones every Friday night and flying back every Monday morning, forcing your cellular orchestras to constantly restart their song without ever finding the rhythm. This rhythm is perhaps most tangible in the rise and fall of your internal heat. While we are often taught that the human body sits at a static 98.6 degrees, your core temperature is actually a dynamic wave that fluctuates by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit every single day. This oscillation is not a symptom of fatigue, but the master switch that controls it. Throughout the afternoon, your body temperature peaks, keeping you alert and metabolically active. But as the sun sets, your internal thermostat receives a signal to drop. Around 2 hours before your typical bedtime, your core temperature begins a steep and necessary decline, a cooling process that continues steadily through the night until it hits its absolute minimum, known as the temperature nadir, usually around 4 in the morning. This drop is a biological requirement for sleep onset. Your brain possesses thermosensitive neurons in the preoptic area of the hypothalamus, which act as a thermal gatekeeper. These neurons will not trigger the full release of sleep-inducing hormones until they detect that your core heat is shedding rapidly. If your core remains too hot, the gate remains closed, and falling asleep becomes physiologically difficult, regardless of how tired you feel. To achieve this cooling, your body performs a remarkable engineering trick involving the blood vessels in your hands, feet, and face. These specific areas of skin are known as glabrous skin, meaning they are hairless and contain specialized vascular structures called arteriovenous anastomoses. Unlike the tiny capillaries that feed oxygen to your skin cells, these structures are wide shunts that allow large volumes of blood to bypass the capillaries and flow directly from arteries to veins right beneath the skin's surface. When your circadian clock signals that it is time to sleep, these shunts dilate broadly, flooding your hands and feet with warm blood from your core. You might notice your hands feeling warm and puffy late at night. This is your body turning your limbs into radiators to vent heat into the room. Studies have consistently shown that taking a warm bath or shower before bed improves sleep quality, but not because the heat makes you sleepy. The warm water causes massive vasodilation, forcing the blood vessels in your extremities to open fully.
When you step out of the bath into the cooler air of your bedroom, the temperature difference causes your body to dump heat through those open vessels at an accelerated rate. It creates a rebound cooling effect that plunges your core temperature downward faster than normal, effectively tricking your brain into thinking it is time to sleep. This reliance on heat dumping is also why the temperature of your bedroom is one of the most critical factors in sleep hygiene. If the room is too warm, the air cannot absorb the heat radiating from your hands and feet, and the cooling process stalls. Do you prefer a cold room with heavy blankets or a warmer room with lighter sheets? The science suggests that a cool room of around 65 degrees Fahrenheit is optimal because it creates the necessary gradient for your thermal radiators to work. There is even a delicate balance involving your feet. If your feet are extremely cold, the blood vessels will constrict to preserve heat, trapping warmth in your core and preventing the drop required for sleep. This is why wearing socks to bed has been shown to decrease the time it takes to fall asleep in cool environments. And even while you sleep, the thermal dance is a constant, invisible tide that dictates your energy, yet it relies entirely on the successful dumping of heat through the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Yet even this thermal rhythm is ultimately conducted by the presence or absence of light. While temperature serves as the internal thermostat, light acts as the master clockmaker, winding the gears of your biology with absolute precision. For over a century, anatomy textbooks insisted that the human eye contained only two types of light-sensing cells: the rods, which help you navigate in the dark, and the cones, which allow you to perceive color and fine detail. This assumption was proven incomplete only at the turn of the millennium, leading to the discovery of a third hidden photoreceptor that has nothing to do with conscious vision and everything to do with time. These specialized sensors are known as intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or iPRGCs for short. Hidden sparsely across the retina, they form a vast, non-visual net designed to capture photons, not to create images, but to measure the intensity of the environment. Unlike the rods and cones that send visual data to the back of the brain to help you read a book or recognize a face, these ganglion cells weave a direct pathway to the hypothalamus, bypassing your conscious sight entirely to speak directly to the master clock. They accomplish this through a unique photopigment called melanopsin. This protein is ancient and highly specialized, caring very little for the warm, long wavelengths of a sunset or the dim, amber glow of a candle. Melanopsin is a hunter of blue light specifically. Evolution tuned these cells to detect the short wavelength radiation that scatters across the atmosphere when the sun is high. This sensitivity explains why a clear blue sky is the ultimate wake-up signal. It floods these receptors with the exact frequency required to suppress melatonin and sharpen alertness. The system is so refined that it even acts as a photon counter, integrating light exposure over time rather than reacting instantly. It prevents your circadian rhythm from shifting wildly every time you blink or walk through a shadowy tunnel. Furthermore, these cells are geographically sensitive. They are located predominantly in the lower part of the retina, which means they are most sensitive to light coming from above, simulating the position of the sun at solar noon. This architectural quirk ensures that overhead lighting stimulates wakefulness far more effectively than light from a desk lamp, tricking the brain into believing the sun is still at its peak. This distinct separation between vision and timekeeping reveals a profound biological reality that often surprises people. It is entirely possible for a person to be clinically blind, possessing no conscious vision whatsoever due to damaged rods and cones, yet maintain a perfect synchronized 24-hour sleep cycle. As long as these melanopsin-rich ganglion cells remain intact and the optic nerve can carry their signal, the body perceives the difference between day and night without ever seeing the world. It is only when these specific non-visual cells are lost that a person plunges into a condition known as non-24, where the internal clock drifts helplessly, untethered from the rotation of the Earth. While that internal clock helps the body anticipate the night, the actual maintenance that occurs once sleep begins is a mechanical marvel that remained invisible to science until very recently. For centuries, anatomists were baffled by a physiological contradiction within the human skull. They knew the brain was the body's most energy-expensive organ, consuming roughly 20% of our fuel, which inevitably creates a massive amount of metabolic waste. In every other part of the body, the lymphatic system acts as a dedicated drainage network, filtering out toxins and cellular debris through a series of vessels and nodes. Yet when scientists mapped the brain, they found it was completely devoid of these lymphatic vessels. It appeared to be a closed system, a fortress with no obvious way to take out the trash, which seemed biologically impossible given the sheer volume of waste produced by neural activity. It was not until 2012 that this mystery was solved, revealing a hidden system of plumbing that only appears when the conscious mind goes offline. Researchers at the University of Rochester Medical Center utilized new imaging technology to look deep inside the living brains of mice and discovered that the brain does indeed wash itself, but it does so by hijacking its own blood vessels. They named it the glymphatic system, a hybrid term honoring the glial cells that manage the process and the lymphatic function it mimics. The reason this massive system stayed hidden for so long is that the flow channels collapse the moment the brain dies, or even when the skull is opened, making them invisible to traditional autopsy methods. It is a system that exists only in the living, sleeping brain. The process relies on a specific type of star-shaped support cell called an astrocyte. These cells surround the blood vessels in the brain, forming a secondary barrier. During the waking hours, astrocytes are swollen and large, packed tightly against one another to support the intense electrical activity of the neurons. The brain is so busy processing information that there is physically no room for a cleaning crew. However, once the brain detects the onset of deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep, the astrocytes undergo a rapid shape change. They shrink significantly, pulling away from the neurons they support. This cellular contraction expands the interstitial space, the gaps between brain cells, by up to 60%. It is as if the buildings in a crowded city suddenly shrank to half their size, turning narrow alleyways into wide boulevards. With these channels now open, cerebrospinal fluid is able to rush into the deep tissues of the brain. This clear water-like fluid is pumped through the tissue by the rhythmic pulsing of the arteries. As the heart beats, the arterial walls expand and contract, driving a wave of cerebrospinal fluid through the newly opened spaces, effectively power washing the neural circuitry. This fluid movement is further facilitated by specialized water channels called aquaporin 4, which line the feet of the astrocytes like microscopic floodgates, directing the flow deep into the brain's center. This tide of fluid mixes with the interstitial fluid sitting between the cells, flushing out the toxic byproducts that have accumulated during the day. The most notable of these waste products is a protein called beta amyloid. In a healthy brain, beta amyloid is produced naturally, but it's meant to be cleared away. If it is allowed to linger, it becomes sticky, clumping together to form plaques that disrupt communication between neurons. These plaques are the same formations found in high concentrations in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. The glymphatic system is so efficient that it clears beta amyloid away much faster during sleep than when awake. The existence of this system explains why sleep deprivation feels physically toxic. Without that nightly wash cycle, the brain is literally swimming in its own waste. The grogginess, the mental fog, and the slow reaction times are the result of chemical debris clogging the gears of cognition. It turns out that sleep is not a passive break from reality, but an active, high-pressure cleaning operation that prevents the biological machinery of the mind from grinding to a halt. To coordinate these complex cleaning schedules and chemical exchanges, the body relies on a timekeeper that is far more frequent than the daily cycle of the sun.
While most people are familiar with the 24-hour circadian rhythm, few realize that human biology is governed by a shorter, faster pulse known as the ultradian rhythm. The term literally translates to many times a day, describing cycles that repeat with a frequency of less than 24 hours. The most dominant of these is the 90-minute cycle, a fundamental heartbeat of the nervous system that dictates the flow of human energy. In the mid-20th century, sleep researchers discovered that the 90-minute oscillation we associate with sleep stages does not actually stop when we wake up. It continues to tick in the background every moment you are alive, known during waking hours as the basic rest-activity cycle. For roughly 90 minutes, the brain is primed for high-frequency processing and focus. Following this peak, the system hits a biological wall. The brain runs low on the specific neurochemicals required for intense concentration, specifically a depletion of sodium and potassium ions within nerve cells. When this trough hits, the body sends clear signals that are often misinterpreted as boredom or laziness. You might feel a sudden mental fog, a desire to stretch, or a craving for sugar. This is not a failure of will, but a physiological demand for a reboot. If you push through this natural dip with caffeine or stress, the body enters a fight or flight response to compensate, burning reserve energy that leaves you exhausted later. When the sun sets, this same 90-minute clock governs the architecture of your night. It acts as the conductor for the transition between non-rapid eye movement sleep and REM sleep. The first half of the cycle is a deep dive into the slow wave sleep, where the body repairs muscle and tissue. Then, roughly every hour and a half, the brain surfaces from the depths to enter the vivid, active state of REM, where memory consolidation occurs. This rhythm is not arbitrary. It is mathematically precise and universal among mammals, though the length of the cycle scales with the size of the animal. A mouse may cycle through sleep stages in minutes, while an elephant's rhythm is much slower. In humans, this 90-minute pulse suggests that consciousness is not a steady, unbroken stream, but rather a series of waves. We are constantly oscillating between engagement and withdrawal, spending our entire lives surfing the peaks and troughs of this hidden biological tide. This tide is not chaotic, it is orchestrated by a silent conductor known as the vagus nerve. This massive nerve acts as a superhighway of information, carrying signals from your gut to your brain and back again, ensuring that every system knows when it is time to rest. When the sun sets and the visual world fades, the vagus nerve signals the heart to slow down, shifting the body from a state of alert readiness into the restorative mode of homeostasis. This shift is not a simple switch, but a chemical conversation between the brain and the gut, often called the second brain. Microbes in the digestive system produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and gamma-aminobutyric acid, which drift up the vagus nerve to tell the brain that the environment is safe. As this safety signal spreads, the body performs a delicate changing of the guard. Cortisol, the hormone responsible for waking you up and keeping you alert, begins to recede like water withdrawing from the shore. In its absence, melatonin rises, not merely to make you drowsy, but to act as a potent antioxidant that scours the cells for damage. It is only when this specific chemical alignment is achieved,
low cortisol and high melatonin that the pituitary gland feels safe enough to release its most precious resource, human growth hormone. This substance is the master builder of the body, yet it is shy. It rarely makes an appearance during the day or during light naps. It waits for the deepest phase of slow-wave sleep to flood the bloodstream in powerful pulses. Under the cover of this deep sleep, growth hormone instructs cells to repair torn tissues, strengthen bone density, and knit together the microscopic tears in muscle fibers caused by daily movement. This is why physical exhaustion feels so heavy in the limbs. It is the body's way of demanding the stillness required for this reconstruction. The immune system also seizes this opportunity. Without the energy demands of moving, thinking, or seeing, the body redirects its resources towards hunting down pathogens and fortifying its defenses for the coming dawn. This internal workshop requires absolute tranquility to function at its peak, which makes the sanctuary of your bedroom a critical component of biological health. Some find that total silence allows the nervous system to settle, while others need the rhythmic hum of a fan or the sound of rain to distract the conscious mind. I am curious what atmosphere you require to let go of the day. Do you prefer a room that is pitch black and silent, or do you find comfort in a dim light and soft background noise? Let me know in the comments what your perfect sleep sanctuary feels like. Whatever the environment, the goal remains the same: to enter that state of equilibrium where the body heals itself. Homeostasis is often misunderstood as staying the same, but biologically, it is a dynamic process of constant correction and balancing. It is the ability of the organism to maintain a stable internal world despite the chaotic fluctuations of the external one. Yet this stability is not rigid like stone. It is intelligent and capable of profound transformation through a process known as neuroplasticity.
While we often think of plasticity as a trait exclusive to the brain's gray matter, the hidden systems governing your rhythms possess their own form of memory and adaptability. The vagus nerve, for instance, acts as a biological superhighway that physically changes based on the traffic it carries. When you engage in regular, slow breathing practices, you are not merely relaxing in the moment, you are fundamentally restructuring the nerve itself. Repeated activation of the relaxation response increases the thickness of the myelin sheath surrounding the vagus nerve. This fatty protective coating functions much like the insulation on an electrical wire, allowing calming signals to travel faster and with greater fidelity. Over time, this creates a permanently higher vagal tone, meaning your body learns to return to a state of peace much more quickly after a stressful event, a biological skill acquired through repetition. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, your master clock, exhibits a similar capacity for learning. It is not just a passive receiver of light data, it is a predictive engine. By exposing your eyes to morning sunlight consistently, you are physically tuning the sensitivity of the neurons within this tiny region. The SCN eventually learns your specific routine, beginning to adjust the release of cortisol and melatonin, not just in reaction to the sun, but in anticipation of it. This ability to predict physiological needs rather than just frantically reacting to them is the true definition of body wisdom. While homeostasis is the immediate balancing act, allostasis is the long-term process of achieving stability through change. If the body is a house, homeostasis is keeping the temperature comfortable, while allostatic load is the wear and tear on the furnace from running it too hard for too long. When the hidden systems are overtaxed, the body accumulates this load, which can dampen the sensitivity of the vagus nerve. Fortunately, the body's capacity for repair is equally staggering and extends deep into the brain itself.
For decades, scientists believed the adult brain could not generate new neurons, a dogma that has since been overturned. We now know that neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells, occurs throughout life, particularly in the hippocampus. This growth is heavily influenced by the very systems we have explored. Stimulation of the vagus nerve triggers a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. You might think of BDNF as a fertilizer for your neurons, encouraging them to grow and form new connections. Even the gut microbiota play a critical role here, producing short-chain fatty acids that can cross the blood-brain barrier to encourage this neuronal growth. This implies that the rhythm of your sleep and the state of your digestion directly dictate the structural integrity of your mind. The body does not just endure time, it learns from it, constantly rewriting its own operating manual based on the inputs you provide, effectively turning your daily habits into biology. This transformation is not chaotic, it is a highly orchestrated performance. When you step back and view the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, and the cascade of circadian hormones together, you are not just looking at isolated biological functions, but at a silent symphony playing exclusively for an audience of one. The vagus nerve acts as the tireless conductor, standing at the podium of the brainstem, signaling when the heart should slow its tempo and when digestion should begin its second movement. It relies on the gut to keep the rhythm, ensuring that the raw materials for serotonin and dopamine are produced on schedule, while the endocrine system swells and fades like a vast string section, releasing melatonin to darken the theater and cortisol to raise the curtain at dawn. What makes this performance so profound is that it happens entirely without your conscious permission. You do not have to remind your heart to beat over 100,000 times a day, nor do you need to manually adjust your body temperature when you slip under a heavy quilt. Your internal systems possess a deep, protective autonomy. For instance, research shows that the heart has its own intrinsic nervous system, often called the little brain, which can sense hormonal shifts and adjust its behavior independently of the cranial brain. Meanwhile, your liver performs over 500 distinct functions, including filtering your entire blood supply every few minutes, a complex detoxification process that peaks specifically while you're asleep. The resilience of this system is perhaps the most comforting reality of all. Even when you are stressed or tired or imperfect in your habits, the body prioritizes your survival with ruthless efficiency. The stomach lining regenerates itself entirely every few days, a relentless act of renewal that ensures the barrier between you and the outside world remains intact. Deep inside your cells, enzymes patrol your DNA strands while you dream, stitching up microscopic breaks and correcting errors caused by oxidation, performing quadrillions of tiny surgeries before you ever open your eyes. This is the definition of biological unconditional love. The body cares for you even when you are unaware of its efforts. As we appreciate this hidden complexity, consider the sheer scale of the network keeping you alive. Your vascular system is long enough to wrap around the Earth more than twice, yet your heart pumps blood through this entire circuit in roughly 60 seconds. The coordination required to keep oxygen flowing to the brain while simultaneously digesting a meal and fighting off microscopic invaders is a feat of engineering that no machine has ever fully replicated.
It suggests that the body is inherently on your side, seeking balance, homeostasis, with a biological persistence that rivals any conscious desire. As we drift toward the end of this exploration, consider allowing your curiosity to rest here for a moment. If you have found comfort in understanding the hidden machinery of your own existence, you might wish to subscribe to this channel, ensuring that the next chapter of quiet discovery finds its way to you automatically. There is a
deep peace in knowing that you do not have to carry the weight of staying alive consciously. You can simply let go. You can trust the silent conductor. The vagus nerve will watch over your breath. The gut will process the day. The hormones will align you with the slow rotation of the planet. All you have to do is close your eyes, knowing that deep within the quiet, the symphony plays on, keeping you safe until the morning comes.